Okay, so the punch in DST is a useless attack that your character defaults to whenever you try to attack a target while having nothing equipped in your hand slot. A single punch deals only 10 damage per hit, less than a flint shovel, and has an extremely long recovery animation, which makes the total length of the attack take almost twice as long as standard melee weapons. This makes it deal a laughably low DPS of only 12. With that little damage, it would take you nearly a minute and a half of uninterrupted punching just to kill a single beefalo. For comparison, a flint axe deals around 58 damage per second, and can be crafted pretty much as soon as you spawn in, so the bareface are essentially completely useless at every stage of the game. I don't blame you if you're not aware that your character can even use this move, because by default the game won't actually let you attack most mobs this way, unless you hold down the force attack key. It's as if the game is trying to tell you not to do this and to get an actual weapon instead. Now you may be wondering how it's even possible to not only kill several bosses like this, but to do so without getting hit a single time. But there are several things we can do along the way to increase our terrible damage output until we can turn it into not only something usable, but actually quite decent, at least against a few of the bosses. Keep in mind that we're not going to be relying on cheesy tactics like gunpowder or firearms for this run. As a rule, 100% of our damage output against bosses in this run must come exclusively from direct hits using punches. As for our character, we will be picking Wolfang, which is kind of the obvious choice here since he can deal 2 times damage pretty much from the start, meaning that instead of 10 damage per punch, we will be dealing 20. This is not the only reason why we're picking Wolfang, but it's the most important reason. We're going to start by gathering a bunch of crescent twigs, and since this is kind of self-explanatory, I'll just take this opportunity to explain the rules of the challenge. Since this is a hard reset run, I'm going to avoid making cuts in the gameplay as much as possible, but this does mean that there will be a few sections that aren't particularly interesting, such as when I'm simply walking or sorting my inventory. When this happens, I'll just speed up the video until the next interesting section. A hit by the rules of this challenge is any stagger or damage that comes from an enemy or a telegraphed environmental hazard. This means things like hunger damage, freezing damage, damage from food, or self-damage don't count as hits, but hits from falling rocks, explosions, touching magma pools, and of course from enemies do count as hits. Note that this isn't the same as a damageless or 1 HP playthrough, and I will be taking a little bit of damage in a few parts, but a no-hit run is much more difficult overall because you can actually lose the run to many attacks that stagger the player but don't deal damage, such as Phil Weaver's Bone Cage. You also don't get the option to redirect damage to a Beefalo for instance, because that also counts as a hit in this type of challenge. In this run, we will be killing all of the classic bosses, which include Dragonfly, Bee Queen, Toadstool, Ancient Guardian, Shadow Pieces, and Phil Weaver. We will not be killing any seasonal bosses, including Claws, nor do any of the Celestial Champion questline. If you'd like to see a no-hit run that includes those bosses, as well as the Twins of Terror, check out my no-hit run of all the major bosses as Walter. I simply didn't feel like including them this time because they would increase the time of the run by almost double, and I personally don't find them to be as interesting as the classic bosses, but maybe in the future I might consider doing another run that includes all the major bosses. Like I mentioned earlier, 100% of our damage against bosses must come only from punching them directly. The only exception to this is when bosses do damage to themselves, which off the top of my head only applies to Ancient Guardian. Against normal enemies, we're obviously not allowed to damage them with any weapon other than punches, but we are allowed to use indirect means of doing damage against them, such as fire damage or for making them fight other enemies. This rule is necessary because this stuff happens by itself all the time, so it would be unreasonable to force the player to prevent this from happening at all, since the world is naturally chaotic. We are allowed to use status effects such as freeze, sleep, and setting on fire, as long as the initial hit doesn't deal any damage, but obviously something like the Fire Staff would only be allowed against regular enemies and not bosses. The next really important thing to point out is that this is a seeded run. This means that I'm playing on a world that I handpicked beforehand and that I already know the layout of, if you didn't already notice by the fact that I found a pamphlet next to Skeleton. This makes the run easier because I know where everything is and can avoid enemies much more easily, but this isn't actually why I chose to play on a seeded world. I will explain this as the run progresses. The seeds that I used can also be found in the description if you would like to check them out for yourself. This is also a completely glitchless playthrough. This means all of the fights will be done 100% legit, and we won't be able to rely on things like AI exploits for an easy kill. And lastly, although not a hard and fast rule, I will keep pausing to a minimum in this run unless I need to take a break. I decided to make it this way because my Walter run had quite a lot of pausing, which made it difficult to watch. Now that I've got all of that explanation out of the way, you may be wondering why I'm filling my inventory with twiggy tree cones and flower petals. The first important thing we're going to do in this run is trade all of these items with cat coons for a pepper seed. We want to do this as early as possible in the run because this is very RNG, meaning most runs are going to reset here. Catcoons have about a 1 in 200 chance of spitting out the pepper seed, and we only have about 40 items to trade with them. The seed I chose has a skeleton next to Walking King here in the Mosaic biome, which I'll be grabbing for the increased movement speed. This is not a speedrun, but being able to do this initial setup quicker is still important because, as a hard reset run, the setup has to be repeated every single attempt. Therefore, being able to do it quicker is good for my IRL sanity. We also want to collect any moon rocks along the way because these will be important to build a celestial portal later on. There's a totally normal tree here that we can chop for 2 leading logs, which is exactly what we're going to need very soon when we head down to the ruins. I chose to carry this bishop head closer to the sappies right away, since we won't be returning to this biome. Wolfgang doesn't get slowed down by carrying heavy objects, which is another reason why he's so good for this run. Once we reach the Pig King biome, the Catcoon lottery begins. There are 3 Catcoons in this area, which helps to make this go by faster, but you need to make sure they're all befriended because neutral Catcoons actually try to kill each other. Every petal or tree seed that you give to them makes them puke out an item soon after, so we just have to repeat this process until they give us a pepper seed. While waiting, we want to hammer these big houses for resources and prototype the backpack at the science machine, while feeding some of the petals to the pigs for manure that we will need to grow this pepper. Thankfully it doesn't take that long in this case, and we get the pepper seed. We also got a lot of tomato and potato seeds, but these are considered common seeds, whereas pepper seeds are in the rare seeds category. They also dropped the beefalo wool, which is good because we will need exactly 1 beefalo wool for the run, and we would otherwise have to punch a single beefalo to death for it. We want to make the Catcoons kill themselves by aggroing the pigs, since otherwise they'll keep following us, and we don't want that because Catcoons can steal our items off the ground. Up next is the second RNG bottleneck of this run, which is that we have to obtain a Vault Goat horn. This is only a 25% drop, and in my case, there will be at most 3 or 4 Vault Goats that I can kill here. Thankfully, this doesn't take me too long, since this seed has the Vault Goats very close to Small Swamp into Pig Forest, meaning I can just lead them to the tentacles and wait for them to die on their own. I actually got excellent RNG here, and got not just 1 but 2 horns from the first 2 goats, which is only about a 1 in 16 chance. I'm actually only going to pick 1 anyway, but this is still remarkably lucky. Chester is also located in this mini swamp, and the terrarium chest is nearby. This chest can contain a wide variety of items, including 1 firefly that we're going to use for a miner hat, which lets us keep having to kill spiders for a buttnet. The contents of the terrarium chest are randomized even within the same seed, but a helpful trick here is that you can save a character selection by simply quitting out without selecting a character, and that creates a save that you can roll back to while keeping the contents of the conspicuous chest the same, as well as many other items that are also randomized, such as the colors of the gems of ruined statues. Chester will be quite helpful in this run for even more inventory space. We want to pick these 12 reeds so they can regrow by the time we come back to this area. Back at the portal, we will place down an alchemy engine and prototype a gold pickaxe and a gold axe. I also take the opportunity to prototype other items that I won't be needing right now but will be used later on in the run. Drop everything you don't need to free up inventory space, because we'll be heading down to the caves now. And don't forget to leave the pepper seeds inside Chester, because birds will eat seeds left on the ground. I chose a cave seed that has a cave entrance right at the sacred biome. This saves me a lot of walking early on, which is good for the purposes of reset efficiency, since we will be fighting the first boss of the run very soon. This cave exit also contains a skeleton nearby with an ice staff and a puffy vest. I believe this headpiece is called the Ice Wizard skeleton. There's a bunny village right here too, and we're gonna have to hire a few of these bunnies to kill bishops for purple gems. Hammering bunny hutches gives you a lot of carrots, so this is pretty straightforward. Make sure that you're not carrying meat, however. This specific bunny village setpiece always has a pitchfork, which I use to dig up a single piece of turf that will be useful at the very end of the run. Don't worry, it will make sense later. It's already the middle of the nightmare phase, meaning mining statues is going to spawn nightmare creatures occasionally. This is fine because we're gonna need a lot of nightmare fuel for this run. Since Bunnymen can't attack nightmare creatures, this means we have to punch them to death. And now's a good time to explain how we're going to manage combat throughout this run. In DST, you can cancel your attack at any point in the animation, and if you do so right after the attack connects with your target, you can then begin another attack, thereby skipping the recovery animation altogether. This is commonly called animation cancelling. This is already useful with regular melee weapons, but it's crucial when using the bare fist, as it more than doubles your damage output if done correctly. The challenge when animation cancelling is timing it correctly, but in the case of punches, even mediocre animation cancelling will still give you a significant increase to DPS. Near perfect animation cancelling is something I can do because I have a lot of experience with it, but it's not strictly necessary. There are many methods to perform animation cancelling, but the one I'm doing right now is called stutter stepping, and it involves moving a tiny distance right after you land an attack. This is convenient because it doesn't involve equipping any items, but I will be employing a different method for the majority of this run. And just in case I have to say this for the billionth time, animation cancelling is not a bug. This is an intended feature of the game, as confirmed by the developers. On top of Mighty Wolfgang's damage boost and the higher DPS from animation cancelling, the Wolfgang skill tree gave him the ability to do an additional 1.3 times damage to shadow type enemies, which lets us do a total of 26 damage per punch against these enemies. This is almost as much as Wilson with the flame tags, and animation cancelling even lets us get an extra hit after the nightmare creature teleports, for a total of 3 hits per cycle instead of 2. So all things considered, our damage output isn't actually that bad. Of course, not every enemy we fight is going to be a shadow type enemy, but this will be sufficient until we can get more ways to increase our damage output. While we're here, we will also want to mine all the statues that contain nightmare fuel, and a few of the ones with green, purple, and red gems. We can use a single red gem to make a fireball, which is essentially a gemball with slightly less durability that was added in the Wolfgang skill tree. This isn't necessary, but it's nice to have. The Lag Day ability gives Wolfgang a 10% speed boost when in regular form, so being able to switch quickly when necessary lets us take advantage of that more often. Up ahead we can use 6 Thulicite to upgrade a broken Soda Science Station, which allows us to make the pick/axe. This isn't required since we're not going to be fighting the Nightmare Werepig in this run, but it's a very convenient item to have, since it has very high durability and the increased work efficiency stacks with Mighty Wolfgangs. Plus, it saves 1 inventory slot whenever we need to chop anything. You can drop the leaving logs in Thulicite at this station because we will be coming back here later to craft some stuff. Now we'll be heading towards the labyrinth to fight the Ancient Guardian. This also gives us an opportunity to get more gems and night refuel from the ornate chests. I'll also grab a single log suit that I'll be using to animation cancel. There are some clockworks along the way, but you can simply make them fight the Death Dwellers. This is especially helpful against bishops, like I'm showing here. It's very important to keep in mind that opening ornate chests can spawn more Death Dwellers which will aggro on you. This isn't much of a problem, but it does mean that you have to be careful not to open a chest if you plan to stay around that general area, which is why I wait until the bishop is distracted before opening this chest. Likewise, I will not be opening that chest outside the Ancient Guardians arena until after the fight, because that might result in them fighting the boss, and by the rules of the challenge, that would force me to restart the run since all damage against bosses must come only from my bare fist. My animation cancelling method of choice will be to swap between two pieces of equipment from the same slot by using the hotkey, in this case a puffy vest and a lock suit. I prefer this method because it lets me use the middle finger of my left hand, which is very important for fatigue reasons, since spamming clicks is a lot more tiring on my right hand. Stutter stepping is very inconvenient in comparison because it forces your character to move constantly, and on top of that you have to press and release the movement key very quickly or else you attack slower, so I don't like to do it. As for the fight itself, it's not too different from how it normally goes, but after you make Ancient Guardian charge into one of the 4 pillars, you should immediately run far away. This is because falling rocks count as a hit if they hit you, and there is no consistent way to dodge them 100% of the time due to a really annoying interaction when they hit the pillar itself, which causes them to bounce at an incredibly high speed and potentially hit the player. I don't know why this is the case, but it means that the only safe openings we get in this phase are when we either make him charge into one of the boulders or when he charges into a pillar from very far away, since a longer charge makes him get stunned for longer. The cane I picked up earlier helps me get a few more hits in before running away, but even with that helping us, this is still a long fight, taking almost 10 minutes. I'll just speed the rest of it up until we reach the second phase. Also, Ancient Guardian decided to be a dick during this part and just absolutely refused to get stunned by anything, frequently cancelling his charge right before hitting a large rock, which he can do for some reason. I think it might have something to do with distance, but it seems to behave quite inconsistently. In the second phase, the fight becomes more dangerous because the shadow tentacles that spawn from the boss are not only really hard to see, but can potentially take away openings from you. He also gets a new jump attack, although this is an opening for a lot of free hits if you run under him, and you can even get a hit in while he's charging the jump. But you do have to be careful because there can be tentacles hiding behind him that might attack you right after dodging. Another thing you have to watch out for is actual earthquakes, which last much longer than the ones created by the boss and can hit you anywhere. If this happens, which is very likely because of the duration of the fight, try to create distance between you and the boss by either stunning him or making him charge in the complete opposite direction, and then wait out the earthquake in a safe location away from the pillars. The way I keep track of where the tentacles are is I have my sound effects turned up as high as possible and then listen carefully for the sound of them spawning. This is pretty much required since, as you've probably already noticed, the light bulbs in the arena actually turn off after a while, and this happens multiple times throughout the fight because of how long it takes. Even with a miner hat, it's still hard to see where the tentacles are because they blend in with the environment. There aren't many other recommendations I can give you beyond just playing well, because this fight is actually quite difficult under these restrictions. You have to be good at keeping track of where all the tentacles are at all times, and move accordingly. You may not even be aware of this, but the second phase actually gets progressively more difficult as it goes on, because the chance of Shadow Tentacle spawning actually goes up as Ancient Guardian loses HP. In fact, near the end of the fight, it's not uncommon for him to spawn multiple tentacles around him every time you stun him. I wasn't aware of this before I attempted this challenge, because under normal conditions, this boss dies extremely quickly. I should mention that once the second phase starts, Ancient Guardian becomes a Shadow type enemy, meaning our damage per punch goes up to 26, just like with Nightmare creatures, which is definitely welcome in this case. Once the Ancient Guardian dies, he drops both the Pillar Scaffold Blueprint and the large Ornate chest. We will be making a single pillar later on, so make sure to learn the blueprint and grab 40 rocks from around the arena to complete the pillar. The arena is littered with them from all the earthquakes, so this is the best moment to grab some. It takes a cutstone and 2 boards to pre-craft the pillar. I need to be transparent that I am using a mod to guarantee a certain loot table from the large Ornate chest, since this is not saved by either seeding the world or performing the save and quit at character select. It's randomized every time the Ancient Guardian dies. This isn't necessary since I do have a cane and thus could simply craft the Lace Explorer, but again, because of reset efficiency, I prefer to save myself a bit of time here, since I can skip having to craft or pick up a Magiluminescence, 3 green gems, and 1 gears. We'll need those last few for an icebox. If you want, you can grab the Thulecite suit, which regenerates as much sanity as the top hat or fashion goggles, but does not lose any durability while wearing it. Going insane is very dangerous in this playthrough since nightmares take a while to kill, but I prefer to keep the backpack and recover my sanity through other means like picking up flowers. The Lace Explorer is a straight upgrade to the walking cane that lets us teleport up to 20 times to any location you can click on, which is quite handy to traverse the world quicker. This teleport also grants us temporary invincibility frames, which will be quite helpful for one boss in particular. Make sure to open any remaining chests for gems and nightmare fuel, and head back to the pseudoscience station. The only thing we need to craft here are 3 construction amulets and 2 deconstruction sticks, using one of the amulets twice to save crafting materials. After that, head back to the surface. We're going to need 12 charcoal later on, so I decided to just burn the trees for it now. With the Ancient Guardian dead, we won't be killing any more bosses for a while until we increase our damage output, since every boss from now on has way too much health to be manageable without buffs. Up next, we'll head to the Mandrake Forest and then the Lunar Island. So after placing down the icebox and prototyping the watering can, drop off as much stuff as you can and don't forget to pick up Chester Sidebone. We also need to start gathering regular seeds from birds because we need exactly 5 of them. Back at the big forest, gather the 12 reeds that have now regrown and refill the watering can at one of the ponds. This item will be very important for one particular boss. At the pig village, gather all the berries, and here I also choose to hammer these 2 pigheads for 2 freshwater fish. This was for something I had planned, but it ended up not mattering, so you can ignore this step. At the Mandrake Forest, we can get 4 mandrakes which will be used for making panfoods. If it's dusk or night, you will have to punch the mandrakes once in mighty form as soon as you pick them to kill them, since mandrakes have 20 HP. We can also chop another totally normal tree for the last living log that we need. Because we obtained 1 beefalo wool earlier from a catcoon, we thankfully don't have to kill any beefalo, but if we needed to, there's only 2 of them here, so it's very simple to separate them. Because this is a seeded run, I also know the location of all the abandoned boats in the map, which can contain some very useful items. The one in my save has a Star Color Staff with just enough durability for the entire run, and this set piece can also contain additional panfoods if you need them. Upon opening the chest, you will either get attacked by pirates or spawn a ghost, so I decided to place a grass raft in such a way that I can teleport out of the boat and back to the mainland very quickly. Opening the chest and using the Laser Explorer both cost sanity however, so don't forget to pick up a few flowers to avoid getting attacked by shadow creatures. I also decided to get the raincoat from the chest, which isn't vitally important but will be nice to have later on. This world has the Lunar Island very close to the mainland, so we can simply teleport there without having to use a boat. Here on the Lunar Island, we're going to set up the Celestial Altar and gather as much Moonrock as we can. The seed contains just enough Moonrock boulders on the surface to get 27 Moonrock without having to either duplicate Moonrock or visit the archives to mine the statues there. Not every seed will have enough boulders for this, so this is another reason why I decided to use a seeded world for this challenge. Note that Moonrock boulders can drop between 2 and 4 Moonrock pieces, so while on average we will get more than enough, there's still a small chance RNG can screw us over, which is why I also made sure to mine the Moonrock statues around the Moonstone at the beginning of the run. Don't forget that there are also random pieces of Moonrock scattered throughout the Lunar Island, so those can be picked up if you don't have enough. Just like the suspicious marbles, Wolfgang carries the Celestial Altar pieces without any speed penalty, otherwise this would take quite a while. Once assembled, we're going to make 3 Moonglass axes for the Toadstool fight, 4 Moonrock idols, and the portal paraphernalia to construct the Celestial Portal. Don't forget to bring a single board to make it, since we didn't prototype boards. That's all we need from the Lunar Island. If you need more sanity, don't forget that you can chop the lunar trees to spawn moon moths, and their wings restore 15 sanity. I obviously wanted to be low sanity for this section because that lets us avoid the Jestles altogether. Even though their attacks don't deal any damage, they do stagger you, which counts as a hit by the rules of the challenge. Once back on the mainland, we're gonna need to gather a lot of honey and some honeycombs. The strategy I found to destroy the beehives the fastest is to set it on fire, punch it 6 times, and then extinguish it with a watering can. Fire damage has some RNG to it, so after extinguishing it, it'll take either 1 or 2 more punches to destroy it. But either way, you'll avoid having to fight any bees at all during the daytime because setting the beehive on fire makes them all empty it. If it's dusk or night, however, walk away after punching it once you extinguish it because the bees will very quickly return to the beehive and instantly turn into killer bees once you punch it. But don't worry, you'll only have to deal with 2 or 3 killer bees at most because destroying the beehive deletes all of the bees that remained inside. Afterwards, we can just kill the remaining killer bees for an extra chance for more honey. We're going to need a total of 28 honey and each beehive drops 3. We also need 3 honeycombs, but every beehive drops 1, so that's not an issue. I took a bit of fire damage from one of the beehives, but that's fine because that counts as self-damage, so it's not a hit according to the rules. I still try to avoid any unnecessary damage out of habit though. Before finishing gathering all the honey, we have to make a small detour to the big swamp for 16 more reeds. A night hat is also located here in my safe, so I unequip my backpack and use the magiluminescence instead, since I don't want to leave my backpack in the middle of the swamp. The swamp can be pretty scary in a no-hit run because of all the mosquitoes, but they're not too bad if you just pay attention and listen when they approach. In this part I didn't realize that a marauder stole one of the fish that I had put inside Chester, so now I can't do what I was planning to do with that fish. This is why I'd recommend just skipping that altogether. The last few beehives are close to the gigantic beehive, and clearing these is especially important because you do not want bees to be around during the bee queen fight. One of these is a killer beehive, and I recommend destroying the hive without killing any of the bees, since they respawn extremely fast, and thus one could attack you while punching the beehive, and we don't want that. I just lead them away first and let them aggro into Chester before destroying the beehive, and then I kill them. For some reason I didn't notice that I had 27 honey and not 28, but I will get the last one later anyway from the beehive that is closer to the portal. We need to head back there now, but along the way we can teleport to the spider quarry biome, which in DC it contains a skeleton with a 70% ice staff. with a celestial portal assembled, we can put all the food in the fridge, make some papyrus while leaving 20 reeds for pan flutes, turn the honeycomb into beeswax, and then hammer the alchemy engine for some resources back. Instead, put down a regular science machine in its place. We now need a garden digamajig to make 3 farm trials for our pepper seeds. Don't forget to dig up all the garden detritus. We will first swap to Wigfrid. Grab the 2 construction amulets that are at full durability, the 2 deconstruction staves, the Waldgood horn, the beefalo wool, and twigs. Proceed to craft the Elding Spear with the construction amulet and deconstruct it for twice as many resources as were used to make it. Then repeat this process until you have 11 Waldgood horns. The Elding Spear is only available if you've unlocked the skill that lets you craft it, so don't forget to enable it. Once you've obtained all the Waldgood horns, quickly use another idol to go back to the character selection screen. Here I decided to disconnect because this actually resets nightmare spawn timers, which reduces the chance of nightmares appearing, and our sanity is low from using the deconstruction staff. Note that nightmares can still spawn regardless, it's just a lower chance, in which case you can either punch them to death, which takes a while, or you can enter and leave the caves to despawn them. I didn't get any nightmares thankfully, but be careful that the animation of the Moonrock idol takes forever, and during that time frame nightmares can easily attack you. Also, Wigfrid spawns with 4 meat, so don't forget to put that in the fridge. Next, switch to Wicker Bottom. We're going to craft Horticulture Abridged and the Everything Encyclopedia. For the first one, we can use the 2 papyrus that Wicker Bottom spawns with, 5 manure that we already collected, and the 5 seeds we gathered earlier. For the encyclopedia, grab 2 papyrus from the floor and the electrical doodad from the alchemy engine. Next, we're going to grow 21 peppers. First, plant the 1 pepper seed and water the plot 4 times. Tend to it once, read horticulture, and hold spacebar so you automatically tend to the plant every stage. If done right, you should get 2 pepper seeds back. Plant these 2 pepper seeds on a different plot because the first pepper used up some of the nutrients from the first plot. Then do the exact same thing, but this time add manure to the plot. I made a mistake here and only used 1 manure because at the time I didn't realize that there was a lot more RNG to how many nutrients a plot can start. Don't do what I did here, instead gather more manure at the start of the run, or even better, make a bucket of poop instead, which not only has 10 uses but also gives twice as much manure value, meaning you're essentially turning 3 manure into 20. And bone shards are really easy to gather by just hammering a skeleton. Regardless, I got good RNG and got back 2 pepper seeds from each. Next, plant all these seeds on the 3rd farm plot and repeat more or less the same process. This time we're not going to be able to tend to all the seeds at every stage, so tend to all of them once before reading the book, and then try to tend to each twice while they're growing by alternating between them like I'm doing here. I add 1 manure for safety, but I don't believe it's necessary to add more than that since we're growing 4 plants at the same time now, and that makes them get the family bonus, which makes up for the lack of nutrients. You'll either get 7 or 8 pepper seeds back, and that's more than enough to get the remaining peppers. We only need 1 seed bag per pepper now, so simply water the plot 4 times and read horticulture and that should be enough. Once we have our 21 peppers in the fridge, we just need to read the encyclopedia 3 times and switch to a different character. However, reading a book while insane will spawn a shadow creature, usually a terror beak, which will not let us switch characters due to the long animation of the idol, and Weaker Bottom only deals 10 damage per punch, so killing them would take forever. What I recommend doing is simply go down to the caves to despawn the nightmares. In my case, I'm also getting a hound wave right now. Because of this, I'm waiting for the hounds to arrive before going to the caves to de-aggro both the hounds and the shadow creatures, which gives me enough time to use the moonwalk idol. Hounds are notoriously annoying in this run because you either have to make them lose aggro and focus on something else, or you have to kite several of them at the same time, while slowly killing them with punches. We do have the Lace Explorer and the Magiluminescence, but even Mighty Wolfgang still takes 8 hits to kill a single hound, and you can potentially get them in the middle of boss fights. That said, getting a hound wave does give you at least 5 days or 40 minutes of safety as far as I know, since that's the lowest possible time until the next hound wave. Next, we're going to swap to Warley, so we can turn all of these Volgoat horns into Volgoat jelly, and turn all the peppers into pepper spice. Both of these items increase your damage significantly, and are going to be our main source of damage for the remaining bosses. Use the charcoal we gathered earlier to make 2 more portable crockpots alongside the one Warley already starts with. We have enough gold to make the portable grinding mill and the portable seasoning station, and since we will have 1 spare use of the construction amulet by the end of the run, I recommend using it on the grinding mill since it's the most expensive of the 3. To make Volgoat jelly, use 2 honey, 1 twig and 1 Volgoat horn. Jelly takes a while to cook, which is why getting 3 crockpots is worth it. Turn 6 honey into 4 honey crystals, which will come in handy, although they aren't required for anything. In addition to the Volgoat jelly, we're going to make 1 creamy potato puree, since Worldly starts with ingredients for it, and as much fistful of jam as we can afford. I was going to make fish cordon bleu as well, but like I mentioned earlier, a marauder stole one of the fish I needed for the recipe, so we won't be making it anymore. While everything cooks, I recommend cooking the raw meat and the berries over the star. Here I noticed that I didn't have enough honey for the last Volgoat jelly, so I had to punch a few bees to death to get it. As for seasonings, put pepper spice on all the Volgoat jellies, honey spice on 4 fistfuls of jam, and then use the remaining pepper spice on the creamy potato puree and the other fistfuls of jam. Once that's done, put everything in the fridge and swap one last time back to Wolfgang. There is one more thing we have to do before fighting the next boss. Stand next to the science machine and make 4 pan flutes, then put in the construction amulet and prototype both the nightmare amulet and the telelocator staff. We can bypass having to make magic stations completely because multiple casts of the Everything Encyclopedia not only stack, but actually transfer between characters. This is something you can do even in regular playthroughs, by the way. The buff is only consumed when you prototype something you shouldn't be able to make. We need to grab everything we need for the next 2 fights, as well as a shovel, raincoat, starcolor staff, and the telelocator staff. We can now head to picking for the final step of this setup. The main reason we needed a seated wall for this run was to guarantee that both the surface and the caves have the set piece with the sleeping hound surrounding the staff. When you pick up the staff, the moisture value of the shard that you're on gets instantly set to the maximum value, which causes rain to start. This is very useful because the second rain of the first autumn almost always has an absurdly high moisture ceiling, which in most cases results in there not even being a second autumn rain. This rain, if we do get it to occur, is pretty much guaranteed to get the surface wet. And Vault Coat Jelly allows us to deal significantly more damage against enemies that are wet because it turns our damage into electric damage. Against dry targets, it increases your damage by 1.5 times, but against wet targets, it increases it by 2.5 times, which when combined with Pepper Spice, deals a whopping 3 times damage, which stacks multiplicatively with Wolfking's 2 times damage multiplier, for a total of 6 times damage or 60 damage per punch. This way, our damage output can actually become quite decent for as long as the buff is active. Of course, wetness is temporary, so not only will we want to extend the duration of the rain for as long as possible, but we will have to kill the next boss, which is Bee-Queen, before the world rise up again, or our damage output will decrease significantly. Thankfully, we have the Telelocator staff. Every time you cast this item, it adds 500 flat moisture to the current value. This by itself does not cause, extend, or strengthen rain, but because moisture is tied to all 3 of these things indirectly, understanding how rain works means you can get a lot of extra wetness out of a single Telelocator staff, which is how we're going to guarantee that the world remains wet for the entire duration of the fight. I will explain what my strategy is to maximize as much wetness as I can. First, use a stopwatch to measure how long it takes for your player's wetness to go up by 1 point, while not wearing any rain protection of course. Using this value, we can determine how long it'll take for the world to lose 500 moisture, since both of these things directly depend on a value called the precipitation rate. I made a handy spreadsheet that allows me to convert these values, and that way I know that I have to cast out the Telelocator staff roughly every 2 to 3 minutes to keep the rain going for as long as possible without risk of it ending. While waiting for the surface to get completely wet, I recommend taking this time to gather all the green mushrooms from this biome using the shovel. I also recommend assembling the suspicious marbles if you have the time. I can do this because the precipitation rate in my case isn't super high, but there is quite a lot of variation to it. Sometimes you get heavy rain, which gets the surface completely wet within minutes, and sometimes you get a light drizzle, which at worst could take up to an hour just to get the world wet enough for the fight. Keep in mind, we don't just want the surface to be wet, we ideally want it to be completely wet. Each shard has a wetness value just like the players. The wet prefix appears on things at around 35 wetness, but wetness can go up to 100, which is ideal because 100 wetness at around this time in autumn takes roughly 15 minutes to dry up, which is more than enough to start and end the fight. Wetness also doesn't deplete while it's still raining, meaning we can get even longer than that. The randomness of the precipitation rate can be annoying, but if you understand how it relates to moisture, it's not that bad. You've probably noticed that as the rain goes on, the strength of the rain fluctuates as well. If you use the Telelocator staff, you can make the rain sort of go back in time, in the sense that it'll fluctuate back to the precipitation rate that it had 500 moisture ago. This means that if you get a light drizzle at first, you can wait for it to get stronger and then time the Telelocator staff to make sure you go back to when it was strong to get more wetness faster. However, as I mentioned, there is a chance you can get a very low limited precipitation that could potentially make the surface take up to an hour just to reach 35 wetness. But this is very rare, and even if this were to happen, you might have to wait a long time for the surface to get wet, but in return you would get to keep the surface wet for an extremely long time as well, since that's how rain works. So neither high nor low values are inherently good or bad. In my case, I got a decently strong rain, which in hindsight I kind of stalled for too long because I'm pretty sure the surface was completely wet several minutes before I started the fight. But in either case, it doesn't really matter too much, we've still got plenty of time to defeat the boss. While waiting, prepare all your items for the fight at Bee-Queen's arena, and optionally use the raincoat to dry off. I also decided to check the cave entrance leading to the blue mushroom biome, which not only contains the second staff trap, but from here we can telepoof to nearby Tosu spawner to verify he's there. Tosu's location is actually decided when you go to the caves for the first time and not on world creation, so even though I know where the 3 spawners are, I still have to manually check where he decided to spawn. I've stalled for long enough, so it's finally time for the Bee Queen fight. For this fight, we'll want to use 3 spicy vulgar jellies and the spicy potato puree to maximize the opting of the pepper buff. Since pepper only lasts for 4 minutes while jelly lasts for 5, meaning there is 1 minute of downtime where you deal 50 damage instead of 60 if you don't eat another spicy item. It's very important to not only have high sanity but be at low wetness, because even though we're not using a melee weapon, we will be using fire and ice types, which can nonetheless slip off your hand if you're wet, which is extremely annoying. Having wet items equipped also drains your sanity quite a bit, and we don't want shadow creatures attacking us mid-fight. Getting Fish Cordon Bleu would have been ideal, of course, but since we weren't able to get that, I have to resort to drying off during the fight instead. Okay, first phase. This is pretty simple, kill all but one Grumblebee and then use the fire staff to distract that Grumblebee. Beat out an attack from Bee Queen, get 2 hits in, do this 3 times, wait for her to fly away and then repeat. Sometimes she flies away sooner, but the same principle applies. You can technically get an extra hit or 2 before she flies away, but because this is dependent on a timer that is invisible to the player, I've never been able to figure out a consistent way to determine when it's safe to do this, which is why you don't see me try to go for it. If you're extremely precise, you can additionally get 3 hits in between dodges instead of 2, but this is very difficult, so I'm not going to be doing that. The only real danger in this phase is that you have to make sure the Grumblebee and Bee Queen are separated before you use the fire staff, because you don't want the Bee Queen to take a tiny bit of fire damage, and you definitely do not want to hit the Bee Queen with the fire staff on accident, since remember, 100% of our damage against bosses must come from punches, or else we have to restart the run. Thankfully, since the world is wet, we don't have to worry about random things catching fire from the Grumblebee. During the second phase, you could normally separate the Bee Queen from her Grumblebees and guide her that way, but we don't have time to do that before our buff runs out. So what we'll want to do instead is use the Pan Flute to get a bunch of free hits in without having to wait. You can see here I occasionally hit the Bee Queen with the Ice Staff even though I don't freeze her, and the reason for this is that we want to trigger her flinching animation. For some reason, making the Bee Queen flinch once after she flies away guarantees that the next time you wake her up, you will actually make her flinch, which lets you get more hits in with every use of the Pan Flute, basically for free. My guess as to why this happens is that the Bee Queen has hit stun chains, so to speak, and triggering hit stun once allows for a new chain to begin, which guarantees this behavior, but I haven't really looked into why it works. Whenever possible, I try to trigger hitstun with a punch after dodging an attack instead, but this isn't always a possibility, so the Ice Staff is good to have regardless. Thanks to this, I can get 6 hits while she wakes up, then do 4 while she's screeching, for a total of 10 hits per use of the Pan Flute, or 11 if you get an extra hit after she flies away. Sometimes I go for 5 hits during the screech, for a total of potentially 12 hits, but that requires precise positioning since you have to begin attacking before she starts to screech. Sometimes if you attack too early, she can actually attack you back without doing the screech, and you don't want that, so it's quite risky. I do go for it sometimes because I've done this fight many times and I'm used to the positioning required for it. That's pretty much it for phase 2, so I'll just speed the rest of it up. If you do this strategy right, you'll only need about one pamphlet for this entire phase, which is not bad considering that we're not even using a weapon. Once phase 3 starts, she starts doing the Grumblebee charge, and this is more or less the same as phase 2, except that after hitting her a bunch of times, I try to take some distance because if you're far away enough, you can actually avoid the charge even though she does do the screech, making it both faster and safer. Additionally, in this phase, she no longer tries to attack you directly unless you get too close, so this is overall easier than phase 2. Even if the Grumblebee charge does happen, we have more than enough speed to dodge through it consistently, and the natural road makes this even easier. Phase 4 is pretty much the same as phase 3, except the charge has a shorter cooldown, meaning you have less time to get away from Beacon before she screeches, although this doesn't really matter that much. And that's Beacon out of the way. The fight took around 13 minutes using less than 3 full pamphlet, which is honestly not that bad for a Beacon fight. I think people usually use more than that. Be very careful when picking up the loot at the end of the fight since the Grumbles are still hostile. We need the Bundling Wrap Blueprint and the Beacon Crown plus whatever royal jellies you can get to recover the sanity that we lost. We get a Hound Wave right away as well. The last one was only a bit over 5 days ago, 5 days being the minimum cooldown timer for the next Hound Wave, meaning this one was exceptionally early. This is exactly why I made sure I fought B-Queen during that 5-day period in which Hound Waves cannot happen. Had I gotten the first Hound Wave a few days sooner, I most likely would have just chosen to wait until after the second Hound Wave to begin the fight, just to be safe. It's not impossible to deal with hounds mid-fight, since you can wait until they start fighting the Grumblebees, but the hounds can also try to attack the Beacon herself, which we do not want because of the aforementioned rules. Thankfully that's very unlikely, and worst case scenario, you do have the buff from the Spicy Vulgar Jelly, meaning you can 3-shot regular hounds, and not that many hounds spawn before day 25 anyway. I decided to just use the pamphlet to get all the enemies off my back and headed to a cave entrance to refill my lead bulbs. This cave entrance sits right next to the 2 remaining Toadstool spawners, meaning we'll be going down here later to fight Toadstool. Up next is the Dragonfly. There's a wormhole here that leads right to her arena, but first I have to destroy this hound mount that is dangerously close to the boss. Hounds from here could potentially aggro onto the Dragonfly, and we don't want that for obvious reasons, so this has to go. Dragonfly is the only mob in the game with a completely unique wetness mechanic. Unlike the Bee Queen or really any other boss, her being wet does not depend on the world being wet. Rather, she has a wetness meter just like the players that gets filled by things like throwing water balloons at her, and your electric damage actually scales off of that, rather than being a flat 2.5 times damage. This is where the watering can comes in. We can sleep Dragonfly and then simply light an object on fire next to her that we can then extinguish 4 or 5 times to set her wetness meter to 100%, regardless of whether or not the world is wet. In my case, the world is still wet since we got it to 100% wetness before and it hasn't dried up yet, but it doesn't actually matter. The fight will be the same in either scenario. As you can see, our damage output starts at 60, but since it's not raining, the Dragonfly is constantly drying up and damage scales accordingly. Additionally, every time Dragonfly enrages, her wetness is set to 0 again, meaning we have to reapply the watering can every time that happens. As for the kiting itself, 7 hits with perfect animation cancelling lines up exactly with the cooldown of her melee attack, which lets me avoid it quite easily as long as I maintain a good rhythm. With regular weapons you can do 6 hits without animation cancelling, and that also lines up perfectly, but that's not an option using Bare Fist. I do choose to use the Magiluminescence for this fight for that extra bit of leniency when dodging, but it's not at all necessary. My own rules against cheesing bosses do not allow me to build walls inside the arena, so my strategy here is to sleep the Dragonfly before she summons the very last larvae of each wave, and then run around in circles waiting for all the other ones to die on their own, since they explode after 30 seconds. By using this pre-crafted campfire to force ourselves into the crafting animation, we can actually cancel the pamphlet animation early, which is useful because you're normally locked into it, which leaves you quite vulnerable. Which pond Dragonfly chooses to spawn larvae is completely random, and she can do it from the same pond multiple times in a row, so it just takes practice to get good at baiting the larvae around in such a way that you can create the opening to bait the pamphlet without getting hit. Once the Dragonfly wakes up, she will spawn the last larvae, and this is the only one we need to kill because that guarantees the enraged form. If we let it explode, there would be a 50% chance for her to either enrage or repeat the larvae phase with an additional larvae, and we do not want her to do that because that would take more time and pamphlet uses. Be very careful when killing the larvae because if you move too far away, it will start chasing after you to set you on fire, and that counts as a hit. Since the surface is still wet, it only takes us 9 hits to kill the larvae, but this won't always be the case. I actually didn't realize that I had a 50% ice staff left over from the Bee Queen fight that I could have easily used here since 3 ice staff swings instantly kills a larvae, which would have been both easier and faster, so I recommend you do that instead. Either way, once the Dragonfly enrages, put her to sleep and then just repeat the entire process from the beginning. Here Dragonfly didn't actually get wet from the watering can because I was too far away when I used it, so I had to put her to sleep again to reapply it. You can tell whether or not Dragonfly is wet by hovering your mouse over her to see if she has the wet prefix, also indicated by the words being blue. Every time Dragonfly goes for a new wave of larvae, she will add 1 total larvae to the previous amount she summoned. In the first round she always summons 5, so now she's going to do 6, meaning we'll want to put her to sleep after summoning the 5th one. I wasn't looking here and I almost ran straight into Lava Pond, which counts as a hit if you get set on fire by it, so definitely be careful. Our buff has already run out by this point, so we need to reapply it before killing the larva. Last larvae phase. There are 7 now, so we have to sleep her after she summons 6. By this point, the world is no longer wet, meaning it now takes me 14 hits to kill the larvae. I really should have just used the ice step. For the last watering can cycle, I recommend using the pamphlet twice because her sleep resistance is really high now, so she can wake up before we finish applying the effect. Our last buff from the jelly is very close to running out near the end of the fight, but don't worry, as long as you play aggressively, we should be able to kill her before the buff runs out. The fight took just under 10 minutes, and of course a bunch of hounds appeared out of nowhere to steal all our meat, so we'll just have to find something else to eat. After this fight, I decided to take a break, and after coming back, there's a few things left to do before fighting the Shadow Pieces on day 21. This next section is essentially just walking, so I'm simply going to speed it up. Now that we have access to bundling wraps, we can bundle tons of things to not only save space but also ditch the backpack in favor of the Magiluminescence, which gives us a 20% movement speed increase. I also recommend hammering the icebox since we can just put all the food in a bundle now, and then pre-craft another icebox for the toadstool fight. This doesn't cost any more custom or gears, it only costs 1 gold nugget. Our next objective is to get the 8 fossils that are required to start the fight with the Ancient Fuel Weaver, and move the Ancient Key from the ruins closer to the tentacle that leads to the atrium. You cannot take the Ancient Key to the surface, so we had to drop it in the ruins. In many seeds, the atrium is close enough to the ruins that you can simply teleport to it, but that is not the case in this seed, so we will have to take the tentacle to get there. I recommend gathering fossils from the stalagmites in the red mushy biome. There's also stalagmites in the cave rocky biome, but that biome can contain nightmare fissures, and those can be quite dangerous. It's nighttime right now, meaning all the cave spiders and spitters are roaming outside their stalagmites, so we have to be very careful here. Thankfully, we have more than enough speed to easily dodge attacks from spitters, so don't panic. Simply put the spiders to sleep as soon as they come out. Some cave spiders don't come out until you mine the stalagmite once, which is why I always hit it and then immediately pamphlet. Don't worry, the spiders will always do their scream animation first, giving you enough time to play the pamphlet without putting yourself at risk, as long as no other spiders are chasing you. I did bring one of the fistfuls of gem with sugar spice in order to make this a little bit faster, because of Wolfgang's increased work efficiency, as well as the one from the pig/axe. I got pretty lucky here and got 2 fossils from every stalagmite, meaning I only had to mine 4, but you might have to mine as many as 8, since it's only a 50% chance for the second fossil to drop. Don't worry, if you ever need to get 1 or 2 more fossils, you can also get fossils from regular stalagmites with a 10% chance, even from the small ones, so that's a good backup option. Once that's done, we'll be exiting from the blue mushroom biome, so we can pick up the second staff set piece. There's less than 15 minutes left until the start of winter, and during winter in the caves, wetness does not go down at all. So as long as we can get the caves to be wet by the time winter starts, they will remain wet for the rest of the run. You can choose to wait until winter to pick up the staff, but then you would have to wait for the caves to get wet, and that can take a while. I should take the opportunity to clarify that the surface and the caves are completely independent of one another when it comes to rain. Some people believe that water from the surface seeps down into the caves, but that's not how it works. With that out of the way, the only thing left for us to do is grab everything we need for the next 3 bosses, and then wait until the night of day 21 to fight the shadow pieces. We will not be returning back to our base anymore past this point, since everything we need fits in our bundling wraps. In this seed, the shadow pieces are unfortunately surrounded by 2 mech tusk camps, which would normally spawn some very dangerous enemies as soon as winter starts. Thankfully, we can prevent them from spawning altogether by simply never unloading the area around the shadow pieces. There are also some Talbers nearby I'm going to kill for food, and to prevent any potential aggression since they are quite close to the set piece. After this, we unfortunately just have to wait for it to be the night of day 21, so feel free to just skip ahead. Alright, Shadow Pieces time. This isn't the most complicated fight ever, but the AI can easily catch you off guard if you're not paying attention. First, summon the Knight, take a step back and then get 8 hits in with animation cancelling. If we were doing a normal Wolf King fight, the Knight would already be dead, but in this case we have to play out the entire first phase. This is the most dangerous one because you have to deal with all 3 of the Shadow Pieces at the same time, so you have to be very careful here. You have to bait out attacks constantly from all 3 of the shadow pieces, and basically just wait for a safe damage opportunity to attack the knight. This is pretty much just RNG because the shadow pieces can either choose to do their taunt animation early or late, and that's the only safe opening to do significant damage. As you can see, I'm dodging the bishop by walking on the road, since when combined with our other speed boost, that lets us completely avoid the first attack. That said, this only works for the level 1 shadow bishop, so we'll need a different strategy for phase 2. Be careful with the Shadow Knight because he's very fast, his attacks have more range than it looks, and the hitbox comes out very fast. He can either taunt after 1 attack or 2, so it's not completely safe to walk towards him if he's only done 1 attack. When he does taunt, try not to hit him in the middle of the 2 screams because he might flinch and cancel the second scream, so you would get less damage. Phase 2, the remaining pieces are going to level up. Here, it's just a matter of switching items quickly and being careful of the Shadow Rook at all times. We want to use the items from Blaze Explorer's Teleproof to dodge the Shadow Bishop right as he attacks. The timing for this is actually more lenient than it looks. What we want to avoid is the Shadow Rook appearing on top of the Shadow Bishop because this makes the Shadow Bishop nearly impossible to target for some reason. So whenever the Shadow Rook attacks while I'm hitting the Bishop, I actually take a step back to prevent this from happening. The only other thing to watch out for is the possibility of the Bishop attacking you right before the Shadow Rook attacks you. You don't want this scenario to happen because if you're unlucky, that's essentially a guaranteed hit from the Rook while recovering from the Teleproof. If you're used to the fight, however, you can tell ahead of time and then simply move away to bait out the Shadow Rook first before baiting out the attack from the Bishop. It's just a matter of experience to know how to handle both enemies correctly, so simply practice the fight a lot and you'll get the hang of it. The third phase doesn't really need an explanation, it's just the Shadow Rook now, with a very simple attack to dodge and a lot of HP. You don't actually need the Magiluminescence since a Keen and a Road is enough speed to dodge this attack, but I decided to keep it on because the road I'm standing on is at an angle, and I don't want to risk stepping off by accident and losing speed. You can make cobblestones instead if you need to. Just 4 of them in a straight line give you more than enough space to dodge the attack. The only other thing to note here is that the hitbox of the bite attack is larger than the hitbox of the Shadow Rook itself, so you'll always have to run back towards the Shadow Rook after every attack. Don't get greedy and try to counterattack before the attack ends or you will get hit. Our damage output for this fight is, I would say, acceptable. Since the world is no longer red, we're not getting the full bonus from Volgo Jelly, but the shadow pieces are considered a shadow enemy, so we do get the buff from Wolfman's skill tree for a total of 46.8 damage per punch. Our pepper buff ran out by the end of the fight, but thankfully the jelly buff lasted long enough to kill the Shadow Rook. Even if your buff runs out, don't worry, 26 damage per punch is still enough to finish the fight. Once they're dead, pick up all the Nightmare Fuel because we're gonna need it for the next few fights. I got kind of unlucky here and got the lowest possible amount of Nightmare Fuel from this fight. You'll normally get more than this, but it's fine. However, I also made a really stupid mistake here and forgot to pick up the Shadow Atrium. Don't make this mistake, it's necessary to start the Ancient Fuel Weaver fight. I didn't realize it for a while, so I had to run back to get it later, and then I made another really stupid mistake. Remember that I was preventing the walrus camps from spawning enemies by keeping them loaded? Well, I completely forgot about them and I stopped looking at my screen and I almost ran straight into one, which would have probably ended my run if I hadn't been walking at an angle. McTusk's blow darts are very fast, and it's honestly a miracle that it wasn't hit by that last one while picking up the Shadow Atrium. I guess this goes without saying, but don't make the same mistakes that I did. We can teleport to Toadstool's arena from here. I know he's located here now because both of the spawners we didn't check earlier are located next to each other. Here we want to cast 2 dwarf stars, one near the hole and another one behind one of the ponds, but not too close to it because we're going to keep Toadstool there, and if we put the star too close we won't be able to freeze him with the ice staff. Place the icebox we pre-crafted earlier and put all the food in there so we can access it without having it rot from the spore clouds. Make sure it's not too close to the pond because spore caps do destroy structures if they spawn under one. Build the pillar we pre-crafted after killing the Ancient Guardian and use the stack of 40 rocks that we collected to complete it. Rocks from earthquakes will not spawn at all within the radius of this pillar. This is extremely helpful for the last phase of the fight because Toadstool's ground pound attack creates earthquakes that are dangerous for the exact same reason as the Ancient Guardians, which is that falling rocks can bounce off the ponds and hit you at extremely high speeds, forcing us to play much more cautiously and losing out on a lot of DPS, and that's not something we can afford since we have to kill the boss before our buff runs out. I actually made a small mistake here and didn't notice that Toadstool wasn't yet wet before starting the fight, in spite of the fact that the water puddles were visible on the ground. I'm not sure if the wetness value for the water puddles appearing is simply slightly lower than the value for the world to get wet, or if it's simply a bug with the Don't Starve Alone mod, but regardless, it did mean that we were doing less damage than we should have at the beginning of the fight. Thankfully, it didn't take very long for the boss to get wet, but once again, we don't want our buff to run out before the fight ends, or we'll go back to doing only 20 damage per punch. The Toadstool fight is not too different from how you would approach it in any regular playthrough. At first, he will only use the broomstones, which are very easy to dodge and highly telegraphed. The spore bombs are very difficult to get hit by if you have any speed boost whatsoever, so it's more of a matter of just knowing where to put them so that they don't block access to any spore caps. I recommend sticking as close as you can to the boss because the spore caps spawn in a radius around him, so that way the spore caps don't block your way. Because we got so little night vision from the shadow pieces, we can't use the magical medicine for this fight, but it doesn't really matter because I actually prefer not to use it. Since you don't move very long distances to dodge Toadstool's attacks, and instead the fight revolves around standing in the right places, having too much speed can frequently cause you to overshoot your movements. For this first round, we won't chop any spore caps yet. Instead, we want to use the high movement speed of level 3 Toadstool to move him behind this pond and then put him to sleep. After that, chopping all the spore caps is very easy because we have access to Honey Spice, which stacks with the chopping bonus from both Mighty Wolfkin and the Moonglass axes, meaning it only takes 2 hits to chop spore caps, and sometimes even just 1 if we get the one shot. After this, try to keep Toadstool behind this pond for the entire rest of the fight. Since the pond blocks his movement, it not only becomes very easy to manage the spore clouds, but this maximizes the period before each round of spore caps during which he doesn't attack, meaning we get longer damage opportunities. When he summons the spore caps, we want to keep attacking him for a little bit because having up to 4 spore caps up at the same time only gives him 20% damage resistance. Once we do start chopping, simply alternate between slipping him with the pan flute and freezing him with the ice. Don't worry, his resistances will not get very high even by the end of the fight, so we get plenty of time to chop the spore caps. Sometimes I place the spore caps down in a location that causes me to lose out on some damage, and sometimes I fail to keep Toadstool behind the pond, but even if this happens, the fight is very lenient with mistakes like that. Just don't forget to make the most out of your buffs before reapplying. Every round of spore caps after this, until the last phase, is the exact same, so I'm just going to speed this up. Okay, last phase. He now gets a ground pound attack that causes an earthquake, but this doesn't affect us because of the pillar we built, so this attack is pretty easy to dodge. The only thing to keep in mind here is that the hitbox on the second jump is very delayed, so do not walk into him until you see the shockwave disappear. Also, it has a very short cooldown, so always expect him to do it whenever you approach him. Somehow, right as he was about to die, Toadstool decided to be a giant dick and did a second round of score caps immediately after one ended. This is a bug, I have no idea what caused this, but what I should have done here is just blast him 2 more times with the ice staff to freeze him, which I didn't do for some reason. No worries though, I have more than enough pamphlet uses to keep him in sleep during this round since his HP is now low enough that we are guaranteed to kill him before the next one starts. In total, the entire fight took roughly 14 minutes. Not the most difficult boss of this run, but you do not want to get overconfident, since the camera perspective can make it very difficult to tell where the hitboxes for his attacks are, so always play cautiously and don't get greedy with your openings. There is now only one boss left in the run, but to get there we're gonna have to kill the big tentacle that leads to the atrium. Ever since the update that made this tentacle easier to find, it is now guaranteed to be surrounded by 2 bishops, but don't worry, Wolfgang has a very convenient item we can use. Earlier on in the run I crafted the coaching whistle, which is an item added by Wolfgang's skill tree that can be made with just 1 flint and 1 rope, no science station required. While in regular form, using this item with the correct timing essentially gives all of your followers 2 times damage. This is normally quite useless since you basically have to stay out of the fight to use it, as it doesn't work in mighty form, but it's perfect for this particular scenario. All we need are 4 bunnymen that are conveniently located in this same area. I am freezing though, and there's also worm wave incoming, so I have to wait for those to spawn first, so I can run away and leave them behind. Start coaching, wait for Wolfgang to finish the clapping animation, then stop coaching and then begin coaching again immediately. Do not do this too early or Wolfgang won't reapply the buff. Just keep repeating this until everything is dead. I made a mistake here and got close to the big tentacle while some of the baby tentacles were still alive. This could have been really bad because baby tentacles attack very fast and are difficult to see, so what I should have done here instead is bring the 10% ice staff that I had from Toadstool and use that instead to reapply aggro. We can now traverse the atrium and simply teleport to get to the ancient gateway easily. Don't bother fighting anything here, just keep running. Place the ancient key first before building the skeleton, because this guarantees that you'll build it correctly. Using the piece of turf that we collected at the very beginning of the run, measure the distance between tiles to mark the range of Fuel Weaver's bone cage with dwarf stores, because that attack counts as a hit, so we're gonna have to dodge it. We want them to measure exactly 3 pitchfork tiles between them, so just watch what I'm doing. I like to reload the game out of habit before this fight, since this resets nightmare spawn timers. Don't worry, we won't go insane during the fight, since the Beacon Crown will be sufficient as long as you're at full sanity when you start the fight, but we will be using the Nightmare Amulet constantly, so it's a simple safety measure. The Ancient Fuel Weaver is a very complicated fight, and I don't have the time to explain all of its mechanics in depth in this video. I will, however, try my best to explain what to do and what not to do for this particular strategy. Our damage output for this fight will actually be surprisingly good, since the Fuel Weaver is a shadow type enemy. So we get the 1.3 times damage multiplier on top of the spicy jelly bonus on a wet target, making our total damage 78 per punch. Getting this much damage is only possible because of the fact that damage buffs are multiplied instead of added together. Start by staying in the center and wait for the Fossil Spike attack. After his next melee attack, he will do a very fast Bone Cage, which we can dodge easily by teleporting out of its range. He might lose aggro due to a bug, but don't worry, just run back towards him. Dodging that first Bone Cage makes his cooldowns align in such a way that he will not do the Bone Cage again for a while, as long as we stay in the center. Keep attacking him and bait out 3 more Fossil Spikes, then a single melee attack. Lead him out of the circle towards this corner, bait another melee attack, and then dodge the Bone Cage by outrunning it. He might walk a little bit before using it, but don't worry, this strategy should work consistently. Now it's just a matter of patience. Reposition him to the corner while dealing damage until he has almost 10,000 HP. Bait out the Bone Cage and start dealing damage with the Nightmare Amulet equipped, so he uses the Insanity attack, which is an opening for a lot of free hits, but which he can only do when he has less than 10,000 HP. Don't unequip the Nightmare Amulet too late, because the stun from this attack does count as a hit. Run away, wait for him to finish casting both the Unseen Hands and the Woven Shadows, then stay within the range of the next Bone Cage to bait it out as soon as he starts moving again. Lead him to this corner and bait out 2 melee attacks while killing any Woven Shadows that get close to him. Dodge the next Bone Cage and lead him to this corner. Do the exact same thing again, but lead him to this corner instead. Put on the Nightmare Amulet, bait out a melee attack, kill the closest 1 or 2 Unseen Hands, wait a little bit, and then unequip the Nightmare Amulet to cancel the attack. This puts the Bone Cage on cooldown as well, but do not leave the range of the Bone Cage. Keep equipping and unequipping the amulet to get rid of the Unseen Hands, and dodge the next Bone Cage after counting 5 to 6 steps from the Fuel Weaver. Before killing the last unseen hand, lead him to this corner, bait out an attack, equip the Nightmare Amulet, wait a little bit before killing the hand, then run towards the Fuel Weaver to get as much damage as you can. Do not kill the hand too quickly or you might get a less favorable opener in the next round. Bait out 2 more melee attacks, dodge the next Bone Cage, and then dodge 1 more Bone Cage before he becomes invincible again. Depending on RNG, he will either summon the hands right away, or you will have to bait out 1 or 2 attacks before he summons them. If you did everything right, you should be able to repeat the exact same process again for every round of Woven Shadows after this. Don't forget to keep your buffs active, and if you need to regain sanity, stand right next to the Fuel Weaver during his summoning animations while wearing the Beacon Crown. Nightmare creatures can and will occasionally force you to miss out on some openings for damage, but don't worry, just focus on not getting hit. Nightmare creatures are now programmed to despawn after a few seconds of not wearing the amulet, so try to take advantage of that whenever possible. Also, remember that the arrangement of unseen hands is rotated randomly every round, and sometimes one of the hands can spawn in the void, which causes it not to spawn at all, so you might only have to kill 5 instead of 6. Regardless, the same principles still apply. As for dodging the Bone Cage, this is 100% a matter of practice and there is no easy way around it. The range to bait out the cage is 12 wall units or 3 pitchfork tiles, but the actual range of this snare is 15 units or 3.75 tiles, which is why I try to stay as far away from Fuel Weaver as possible while still being in the inner range. This is what the dwarf swords are useful for. Additionally, do not forget that Fuel Weaver is capable of cancelling the recovery frames of his own attack animation into a Bone Cage, which can make it very hard to dodge on reaction. This is why I try to play out the fight as scripted as possible, because that keeps the timing for each dodge almost completely consistent. Again, this is a matter of practice, there's no easy trick to do this fight. Sadly, you cannot put down cobblestone in the atrium, so a Keen and a Magiluminescence is all the speed you can get without innate speed multipliers. Still, with both of these speed buffs at the same time, the timing of the Bone Cage dodge is at least somewhat lenient. I consider this fight to be more difficult than all the other ones in the run put together, but it's also the one for which I have the most practice. The most important thing is to not panic and stay focused. Thanks to our damage multipliers, we can finish this fight pretty safely in only 5 rounds of Woven Shadows, as long as our animation cancelling is good. In comparison, doing this in 5 rounds in my Walter run took near perfect execution and good RNG, so it's safe to say that you get some room for error. And that's the last fight of the run done. In total, this fight took a little over 8 minutes, and our final time of the run was 3 hours and 28 minutes, or at the very start of day 27. Now we can finally conclude that yes, you can in fact no-hit those altogether using your bare fist as your only source of damage, but I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to do so for reasons that should be pretty obvious. If there's anything positive I can say about this run, is that at the very least it was kind of nice not to have to spend time gathering any weapons, healing, or armor. The only thing left for us to do now is to use the only emotes that make sense for a run like this, and if you enjoyed this run, please let me know in the comments if you would like to see more of this type of videos, since this isn't the type of content that I usually do. Good luck if you ever attempt any kind of no-hit run, because these types of challenges take a lot of patience, in which case I hope you find these strategies useful. See you all next time.